And welcome back to DH Deck Building. I'm your host Demo, and today I am ranking the commanders from Commander 2021. Again, just like my Strixhaven ranking list, I'm going to be using the same metrics, so I'm not going to go over it all. You can go check out that video if you want a deeper explanation of my ranking system, but basically it's power level, the power potential of that commander essentially, and then the what I call cuff or uniqueness. You know, I didn't want to just say uniqueness because a lot of things factor in, like how interesting is it of a build around, how fun is it, how interactive is it maybe, and I think both of these metrics combine well to sort of rate how popular a commander will be in the format. So there are 20 commanders from Commander 2021, which, I just don't get it. Like, there was 22 in Strixhaven. So there's more commanders in Strixhaven than in Commander 2021. And that, again, just goes to the confusing part of it just feels like Strixhaven is just a better commander set than Commander 2021. I don't know. I'm not sure what they're doing there. I mean, at the end of the day, we get to play with all these cards, so it doesn't really matter. It's just a little confusing. So starting out at number 20, Kivash. I gave Kivash a power level of 3. Not super powerful, obviously. It costs 5 too. Like, I take casting cost into effect here too. Like, if something's cheaper, I think that increases the power level because it increases the chances you can get it out early and really get going. The ability here is very restrictive. You pay X life where X is exactly the amount of life you gained, and then you get a demon token with flying. Yeah, I mean, it's okay. It's definitely not that powerful. The uniqueness, I gave it a 3 as well. Not very unique. I mean, obviously there's no commander that does this exact same thing. When I did my Strixhaven video, people were like, oh, there's no other commander that does this. Yeah, all of these commanders are not exact copies of other commanders that already exist. Yeah, technically they're all completely unique, but all in all, what you're doing here, paying life, gaining life, making demon tokens, nothing about that is really unique. So a total score of 6, and I don't expect a lot of people to be tackling this commander and building decks with it. Coming in at number 19, Dika. And Dika, again, I gave the comparison to Talrond because I think there is obviously a lot of similarities there. You probably build the deck the same way. In fact, you could easily, if you had a Talrond deck, swap out Dika as the commander, and I think you would be just fine. So for that reason, I gave it a power level 5. Uniqueness, though, 2. I mean, again, I'm doing a direct comparison here. So, and I think you probably will be doing a lot of that and a lot of other things that a mono blue deck is typically going to want to do. The making your creature tokens unblockable is really the only unique part about this at all. So a total score of 7. Coming in at number 18, Fane. And Fane, I gave a power level of 4. I like that there's lots of options here. That's good. Sacrificing creatures, there's always lots of things you can do there. What I maybe would have liked to have seen here is a draw effect, like sacrifice an artifact and draw a card. I don't know. I mean, you're just doing +1/+1 counters, then you're creating a treasure token, and then you're making a creature token. Like, none of that is really very powerful. So even if you did get infinite mana, that untap ability does bump up the power level a bit here, because if you get infinite mana or even a lot of mana, like a Cabal Coffer's Urborg, you could go to town. But at the end of the day, I mean, you're not really doing a lot though, right? It's not like you can draw a bunch of cards. I mean, you can put other cards in there that will do that. Then I need a whole bunch of other cards in order to do that. So the power level here is not great. The uniqueness isn't fantastic either. I give it a 4. We've never seen a commander like this. Okay. I don't know if there's any creatures in the game that have 3 tap abilities like that. I can't think of one anyway. It is relatively unique. It is sacrificing creatures and artifacts, which I kind of like. So there is a lot of ways you can go with this. However, sacrificing creatures, sacrificing artifacts, making tokens, +1/+1 counters, none of that stuff is very unique. So I thought 4 was appropriate. So a total score of 8 for Fane. This one might surprise me though. This is the one where, even though I rated it low, it might be popular though. Mono black, everyone likes black. So that in itself sort of helps Fane out, I think. Next up, Lochiel. And I gave Lochiel a 3 for power rating. Just the mono white artifact creatures theme, that in general the ceiling is really, really low there. I think that it does have a draw effect. And I know in the last video I said, if your commander has a draw effect, that it should be at least like a 4 or a 5, but the draw effect is very minimal. It only triggers once each turn. You know, typically that you're only going to be doing that on your turn. You can put tokens into play on other people's turn, but now you got to put a lot of work into doing that. So it seems to me like you're just putting a whole lot of work here into, I'm going to put a token into play on my opponent's turn just so I can draw a card. You know, the preventing damage to your attacking artifact creatures is not great. This is actually one of the commanders that I was kind of excited about when I first saw it, and I thought this would be an interesting build around. And then I thought, you know what, you're probably going to be spending most of your time just trying to draw cards off of him, and so that for me just isn't great. And artifact creatures in general is a weaker theme just because they're so susceptible to removal, right? Uniqueness, though, I gave it a 5. I mean, obviously uniqueness here, just on the fact that it's a mono white commander that draws cards, that already puts it in a fairly selective group. So 5 I thought was good for a total score of 8. I don't see it being too popular in the format at all, though. Next up, number 16, Lalia, the Blood Reforged. And this one I really like, to be honest. This is one I already have made a deck with, and I'm probably going to do a deck tech for. Even though it's a little on the boring side, I'm not even sure, because I don't love mono red, and I don't really love Voltron, and I don't, you know, I don't know why I am attracted to this commander. I just am. I just right away went out and built the deck with it, and it's a very interesting deck, even though you might not think so. Power level here is a 4, and again, because I've built a deck, I have a little more information on what you can actually do with this commander. That second ability, whenever you exile one or more cards from your library or graveyard, right, you can do 3 or even 4 of those different effects on each turn without even paying mana. So it's really easy to put 3 or 4 counters on Lalia every single turn. So, man, I don't even know if 4 is high enough for power level. I think, you know, Voltron just isn't super great in Commander. It really has sort of gone to the wayside a little. But 4 I think is appropriate. I gave it a uniqueness of 5. The exile theme isn't totally unique because just in the last year we've had a few commanders come out that do the sort of exile tribal, but still is relatively unique in what it's doing. So I kept it in the middle, so a total score of 9 for Lalia. Next up, Niles. And I gave Niles a power rating of 2, right? I mean, obviously this isn't very powerful. It is sort of a ghostly prison type effect in the command zone. That in itself can be powerful. Like, I've heard people say that that is sort of a useless ability because it's not proactive or something, which I find pretty baffling considering there's tons of decks, Pillow Fort type decks out there. If you've ever played against an Aloro Pillow Fort deck, you know, it's a strategy that helps whatever else you're doing. I've said many, many times, it's why I like life gain, because it just keeps you from dying. And as long as you're alive, you can keep doing whatever it is you want to be doing. Most decks are going to kill you through just dealing you damage, and most of that damage is going to come from attacking creatures. So if you're not taking any damage from attacking creatures, you're already coming up all right, I think, in a game. But obviously the power level here isn't great. However, the uniqueness, I gave it an 8. I mean, how is this not super unique? Really unique. Even though it is a prison or pillow fort type of effect, the way that Niles is doing it is completely unique. Again, it's political. You're putting counters on your opponent's creatures, right? You get to choose too, right? That's the important thing. This is not like some of the other effects where they can put counters on their creatures if they want to, but there's just a lot of interesting cards. If you actually go through and search up cards that are putting counters on other people's creatures, Magnetic Web is one that I mentioned already. Sensei Golden Tail is another one that you can throw in the deck that can put counters on your creatures and also your opponent's creatures. I think it's a really interesting build around. That's why I gave it such a high uniqueness score. So it ended up with a total score of 10. You know, I don't expect it to be very popular in the format. However, you know, I do err on the side of, is it an interesting build around? And I think it is. Coming in at number 14, Ryonya. And Ryonya, I gave a power level of 3. Even though there is, I think, some busted things you can do here. It costs 5, so now we have to get to 5 mana. We play our commander. It does have the at the beginning of combat on your turn trigger, so We can use it right away if we have a creature in play already, but chances are we're not going to have those extra instants and sorcery stacked up on there. So we're just going to get the 1 token copy. Then we got to wait another turn, cast a few instants. Like, there's definitely some stuff you can do here, definitely. I just thought it was very limiting, especially just because it's in mono red. I think that holds it back quite a bit. I think if this was an Is It commander, it would be much, much better. But uniqueness, I gave it an 8. What other card is doing stuff like this? This is also the build around value, right? And I do really like the at the beginning of combat on your turn. It's going to trigger every turn, and you don't have to put any mana into it. It just sits there and does work for you. I always like cards like that. So a total score of 11 for Ryonya. Coming in at number 13, Zafe Thunder Conductor. And I know this is going to be the one that people are going to probably freak out about, because I think people like this commander. Tanazir was the one on the Strixhaven list that I had rated pretty low because I didn't think it was great, but a lot of people like it. So, okay, great. Have fun with it. This is the one on this list that I think people are going to be like, oh, you're crazy. It's way better than that. Okay. I mean, I'm giving Zafe a power level of 7. Okay. That's pretty high. There are, again, some busted things you can do here. You know, the fact that this Magecraft ability just fits in Is It really, really well anyway means that you can have other stuff that trigger with instants and sorceries. And if your Zafe's not on the table, you're still going to get, you know, you don't actually need your Zafe in order for the deck to work, really. So I'm sort of basing this on the actual commander's ability. And I know a lot of people pointed out, okay, if that spell's mana value is 10 or greater, deals 10 damage to an opponent, chosen at random. And a lot of people said, hey, you can use X spells. Okay, but then you're just filling your deck with X spells, and you still have to pay the 10 mana, right? How many times are you going to cast a 10 mana spell in a game? Is it more than once? Like, how many times is that going to happen? And you're choosing an opponent at random. So maybe you're going to shoot the person you don't want to, right? So I think that ability is... I know the 10 damage really sort of grabs people, but I really don't think that ability is very good at all. And the other abilities are just okay. I mean, you're making a 4/4 blue and red elemental creature token, right? Again, just a vanilla creature token. Not great. And the uniqueness I give it a 4. I mean, I don't know. For anyone who really likes this commander, tell me how I'm wrong. Is the power level more than 7? I don't think the uniqueness is greater than 4. It's not very unique. It's just an Is It sort of a spell slinging commander. I think you probably could take a whole lot of Is It decks, right? Again, this plays into the uniqueness, right? Can I take some Is It deck that already exists and just swap this commander out? I think you could. I think you could take a whole lot of Is It decks, like a Mizzix deck, and just swap this out and you would be perfectly fine, right? So for that reason, I don't think it makes it very unique at all. So a total score of 11. Coming in at number 12, Willow Dusk. And again, I already made a Willow Dusk deck tech, and I'm trying not to be biased here, but because I made the deck and I know what it can do, I'm giving it a power level of 5. And I think that's being pretty unbiased. I think you can do some really crazy busted things with a Willow Dusk deck. I mean, you just think of cards like Sylvan Library and Necropotence and Aether Vial, cards that are already really, really powerful cards in their own right, fit into that deck really well and really easily. In fact, you could really just make a black-green, good stuff, pay life sort of theme, and then just use your commander as a win con, to end the game. Just put 40 counters on something and just close out the game that way. So I think 5 maybe isn't even high enough, but I'm going to stick with what I wrote here. The uniqueness is a 7. And I made the uniqueness a 7 because, yeah, gaining life, that's not unique, even especially in this set. But I thought the really interesting part for me is that they did the gain life or lose life, whichever is greater. I really like that. Again, because as a build around, and if you watch my deck tech and see of how I built it, as a build around, now I'm going 2 different directions. Or I can go both directions. I can go both directions, and if I gain a bunch of life in a turn, I can do that. Or I can do the life loss thing if I want to do that. I really like the versatility there of going those different directions. Also is fitting a +1/+1 counter theme into a life gain, life loss deck. So there's just a lot of things going on there, which I really like. So a total score of 12 for Willow Dusk. Coming in at number 11, Albu Ancient Witness. And again, these, I rank these, I do the power levels, I rank them all by power level, and then I rank them all by the uniqueness, and, I add them together and they fall wherever. And this one is a little higher than I thought it would be. I gave it a power rating of 4. I really like that ability, the ability of I can just attack with a Thopter token, and it's going to deal X damage and scry X. I really like that. I like that you can get a whole bunch of value out of just swinging with one tiny little creature at one opponent. You can just remove whatever the biggest creature is on the board typically, and then that scrying, it's really a great commander, even if you just want to be like assembling a combo. Because you're going to scry 4 or 5 or 6 every turn, you really can dig through your deck to get the card that you want if you want to combo off. The artifact creature theme, though, again, as I said in my spoiler video, artifact creatures are so susceptible to removal because they die to creature removal and they die to artifact removal, and your commander being an artifact creature also makes it very susceptible. So you really got to make sure you got those Boros charms and stuff like that in this deck so you can keep from getting blown out. Uniqueness, though, I gave it an 8. There's not very many artifact creature commanders at all. The fact that it's an artifact creature commander, you can build this deck in a lot of different ways. So a total score of 12 for Albu as well. Coming in at number 10, Octavia. And I haven't really seen anyone talking about Octavia, so I thought it would be a really popular commander when I first saw it. Maybe not. I gave Octavia a power level of 5. I just think, first of all, that cost reduction, is just huge, right? Like I said in the spoiler video, once you get to the 8 instance of sorcery cards in your graveyard, that's it. You're good. Unless someone exiles your graveyard, your commander is going to cost 8 less for the rest of the game. Ward 8 is essentially hexproof, right? No one's ever going to pay 9 mana for a Path to Exile, I don't think. And then that last ability is also really fantastic. There's just a lot of really fantastic things going on here. And I gave it a uniqueness of 7 because, just everything about this. Come on, the flavor here is great. Again, the uniqueness and flavor sort of play into it a little bit. I don't go too much into the flavor, but the flavor here is really fantastic. As been pointed out, the reoccurring 8s everywhere, octopuses have 8 tentacles, all that kind of stuff, right? It's doing lots of unique stuff, I think. So I think 7 is warranted here. So 12 total for Octavia. Like I said, though, I suspect that maybe it's not going to be as popular as I thought it would be. Next up, Guyhome at number 9. And I gave Guyhome a power level of 3. I thought you get 1 food token, right? It's a non-token creature, so that makes it very limiting. You get 1 food token per creature. So, just getting a food token isn't great. I've heard people talking about the sort of the combos that you can do where you can get lots of food tokens. Okay, but then you just have a bunch of food tokens. And what? You're going to pay 2 mana to gain life? That doesn't seem great to me. Guyhome uses the food tokens himself, and I like that. I like that you can give your creatures indestructible, and you can even use it to tap down your opponent's creatures. Like I said, that's how I would build the deck. I would build the deck with, I'm just playing a good stuff creatures deck, and I'm going to protect my creatures with that second ability. A lot of other people thought that was uninspiring, and everyone just seems to be going the food-themed route here. That's why I gave it a uniqueness score of 9. Obviously, it's a very unique commander. The theme here is incredible. The flavor, him being a master chef, he's cooking food for everybody, they're eating it, and it's making them indestructible, and I guess it's making them full also. That's why they're tapped. Just fantastic flavor. And I get that people are excited about, I'm gonna put Feast of the Unicorn in here, and all these feast/food theme cards. Okay, I don't think that's a very good deck. It sounds like a lot of fun if you just want to make a goofy deck like that. I think Guyhome could actually be a good commander. I think you could actually make a pretty good deck with this. Definitely going to be popular, though, for sure, because of both of those reasons, right? So it has a total score of 12, but of all the 4 commanders that were tied for 12, I put this one as the highest because, again, I just think overall, at the end of the day, it's going to be the most popular one out of that group. Coming in at number 8, Felisa. And again, I already did a Felisa deck tech. Really interesting. There's some really fantastic combos in there. Everyone's like, Cathar's Crusade, yeah. And I had a bunch of people ask me why I didn't put it in the deck. I just don't play that card. It's just one of those cards, sort of like Consecrated Sphinx or Crater Hoof. It's those cards that were so ubiquitous in the format when I first started playing that it just completely turned me off of it. So I just don't put them in any decks. Definitely works in this deck for sure. I gave Felisa a power level of 5. You know, it's right in the middle. I think there is definitely some busted things you can do with it. I pointed out the Phyrexian Devourer combo in my deck tech that I think works really well, where you can just exile, you know, half your library on your opponent's end step and create all these tokens. It's not an infinite or necessarily game-ending combo, but you can end the game with it. So I thought 5 really in the middle. You know, the only thing that holds it back a little is because Felisa, you know, it's one of those commanders where its ability is very unique. So I put a lot of those creatures in there like Acacian Money Changer that if Felisa's not in play, it's just a really bad creature, right? So you just got to be careful with that. Uniqueness 8. I mean, come on, this is very unique. And again, as I was saying, when I was building the deck, I was like, oh, look at all these interesting cards that I can put in this deck that are basically garbage, unplayable cards typically, and they fit so perfectly in this deck. I love that. That's what I think makes a really interesting build around for a commander. So a total score of 13 for Felisa. I think because of that really unique ability, there's so many different directions you can go with it that I think she is, in the long run, going to be a very popular commander in the format. Coming in at number 7, Ruxa, Patient Professor, and this one was tough. So for Ruxa, I gave a power level of 3. I just think the challenge of building a vanilla creatures deck, that in itself is challenging, even though all those abilities are really, really good, right? So you can put your grizzly bears in this deck, and whenever Ruxa attacks, you can return that grizzly bears from your graveyard to your hand. That's really good. That grizzly bears is going to get a +1/+1, and it can assign combat damage as though it weren't blocked. So that's all really good stuff, but at the end of the day, you do have to fill your deck with vanilla creatures. So I gave Ruxa a power level of 3. The power level is just not there. It really holds you back having to rely so heavily on vanilla creatures. And again, what happens if your Ruxa's not in play? Now you just have a bunch of grizzly bears in play, and that's not going to be great. However, the uniqueness is a 10. Again, there's nothing like this. There is Marigunda Petroglyphs, right? That one enchantment. But other than one enchantment, there definitely is no commander that does this. It's extremely unique in that regard. I think for that reason, it's going to make it a very popular commander, or at least sort of maybe middle of the road commander. It's definitely going to see a lot of play. It just makes people really go on the hunt for, let's see what kind of creatures can fit in this deck. And as I noted in the spoiler video that I did, you don't have to necessarily go all vanilla creatures, right? You can go more of a combo theme where I just have a grizzly bears in my graveyard. I attack with Ruxa, I get it back, then I can play it and sacrifice it again and get it back and sort of get into maybe loops like that. So there are other ways you can go with this, not just a vanilla creatures deck. So overall rating of 13 for Ruxa. Coming in at number 6, Brina. And Brina was one that I was really excited about when I first saw it. I just thought very unique, very interesting ability. I gave it a power level of 4. Again, this is one that, just like a few of these others, I actually did build a deck with. And this was the opposite, actually. I was super excited about Brina, and I thought, oh, you could put Healing Salve in there and manipulate your opponent's life totals and whatnot. And you could, and as I was building the deck, I started to realize maybe Brina isn't as powerful as I thought. Yes, you're drawing cards. You're also letting your opponents draw cards, which isn't great. Your opponents can really take advantage of Brina's ability if you don't rein them in. Casting the Healing Salve, although that is very unique, is going to, I mean, you're letting your opponents gain life. That's not great either. Again, we're talking power level here, right? Power level, even though you're drawing cards, is good. Putting counters on your creatures is good. I think you're helping your opponents so much, or inadvertently even helping your opponents so much, that it's going to hold the power level down. I gave it a uniqueness score of 9, though. I mean, obviously, very unique in what it's doing here. It's a political theme. Even if you're not trying to do a political theme, it's going to end up being that anyway. That's not completely unique. There's lots of other political commanders, so that in itself isn't unique. The way it's doing it is very unique. I like the way you can manipulate your opponent's life totals to sort of get draws for whoever you want. Again, though, as I said, it is difficult. As I started to build the deck, I realized that the life gain, life loss to your opponents at instant speed, because you want to have to do it at instant speed, is a lot more difficult than I thought it would be, so it didn't really work out as well as I thought it would. So a total score of 13 for Brina. You know, I mean, it is 6. Overall, out of 20, 6th overall is pretty darn good. And people do like political commanders. I think it'll be a popular commander in the format for a long time to come. Coming in at number 5, Addressnev. And I should also note that I think a lot of the pre-con commanders tend to be a little more popular too, just because they're in a pre-con. I gave Addressnev a power level of 7 because you can do some pretty busted things here. Not crazy, like a lot of people are like, oh, another busted Simic commander. I don't think it's that busted. Doubling effects are really, really great, and when they're stapled on a commander, there's a lot of ways you can go with it. I think it's a uniqueness score of 6. Again, doubling tokens isn't unique in itself. Mostly I gave it a 6 for the ways you can build it. I already made a deck tech with this. It's an investigate deck. You don't have to just go, I'm going to put token creatures in play. You can do all sorts of tokens, right? Again, I compared it to Atraxa, where Atraxa is so popular because Proliferate works with so many different things, right? There's so many different build arounds for Atraxa. Addressnev, I think, is going to be the same. It's a little more limiting because it's not 4 colors like Atraxa is. It's only 2. But at the end of the day, I think it's going to be a really popular commander in the format. So a total score of 13 as well. And again, of all the 4 commanders that were tied for 13, I put Addressnev at the top because I thought at the end of the day it would be the most popular of those. Coming in at number 4, Eudora. I gave Eudora a power level of 4, and maybe that's not high enough. This is one that I think people might be surprised with how high it is. I was kind of surprised with how high it is, but the more I thought about it, the more I was like, okay, maybe it should even be higher. I mean, that ability, right? Whenever a creature you control dies, it becomes a face-down forest land, right? And apparently, right away, Wizards of the Coast had to put out a post where they said, actually, Morph does work with this. So even though it says it loses all types and abilities, apparently that's how Morph works. I mean, you really do get into some confusing things here with this face-up, face-down thing. But at the end of the day, this ability is relatively powerful. I think there are maybe some combos you can set up here. So I don't even know if a power level of 4 is high enough. I gave it a uniqueness a 10, though again, this is the second 10 uniqueness on this list. No other commander is doing anything like this, without a doubt. I mean, there's no effect in the entire game that does this. When your creature dies, it comes back into play face down as a land. I mean, so unique. So many different ways that I think you can go with this. Again, I already made a deck with this because I thought was a pretty unique idea for this deck. I'm gonna have to throw a couple of morph cards in there now because that's an idea that I came up with originally. I was like, hey, it would be interesting to do morph cards with this. And then I thought, oh, that probably won't work because they lose abilities. But apparently they do work, so I'm going to have to throw a few of those in there as well. So an overall rating of 14 for Eudora. Next up, Vyran, coming in at number 3. And this one I really was surprised. I didn't think that Vyran was very exciting, to be honest, when I first saw it. I'm like, okay, you're playing an Is It Spellslinger deck. Again, this is just like with Zafe, where I think you could probably swap Vyran out in your Mizzix deck, or maybe even your Niv Mizzet deck, and you would be perfectly fine because it's doing a lot of the same stuff. So for uniqueness, I gave it a 6 because even though it has that very unique sort of panharmonicon type effect for your spells, it is still doing a lot of the same stuff that Izzet commanders do. I just wasn't impressed with Izzet in general, or Prismari, I guess, for Commander 2021 and for Strixhaven, just because I felt like, again, you can just swap these out for a lot of your Izzet commanders, and I'm probably sure you won't even notice much, right? The power level here, I gave it an 8. The panharmonicon type of effect, the doubling trigger type of effect, you really can go to town with. I think you could easily make a crazy storm deck with this for sure. There are already tons and tons of cards in Izzet colors that trigger when you're casting instant and sorcery spells, and then the copying part on top even adds more to it. I really think you can do some busted stuff with this commander for sure. So I thought a rating of 14 overall was appropriate. And again, although Eudora has a 14 as well, I thought at the end of the day Vyran was probably the easier build around, so that's going to make it more popular at the end of the day. Coming in at number 2, Essex, Fractal Bloom. And again, I gave Essex a power level of 8. I just think, again, the power level here, it's more about the potential. It's not necessarily what you're always going to be doing, but even just I cast my Avenger of Zendikar and I get a zillion plant tokens, and then I play one land and put 20 +1/+1 counters on all of them. As people have pointed out, that one play in itself raises the power level here. Even though people have pointed out that particular example, I think there's a lot more possibilities out there similar to that, even though they rein this in, right? Where it's the first time you would create one or more tokens on your turn, right? That definitely reins the power level in. I think still you can go absolutely nuts with this commander for sure. So I think a power level of 8 is warranted. And I gave it a uniqueness level of 7. Creating tokens, not unique. Copying creatures, not unique. However, the way that Essex is doing it definitely is very unique. So I thought 7 was good. A total rating of 15. Again, I think this is a commander that in the long run, we're going to see towards the top in Commander 2021 at least. We're going to see it to be one of the more popular commanders in the set. Very unique ability that you can do a lot of stuff with, right? There's a lot of ways you can build this deck. And coming in at number 1 of all the commanders in Commander 2021 is Oscar, the Reconstructor, and this one really surprised me. Again, just like with Strixhaven and Exodus coming in at number 1, that was a big surprise for me, and so was this. But the more I thought about it, and the more I thought, the different directions you could go with it, and some of the silly things you could do with it, I thought, it really does make sense. Just like with Exodus, I'm like, yeah, I guess that does make sense. So power level, I gave it a 7, and I know some people might think that's high, but again, just like I said with Essex, being able to create token copies of things, and especially because Oscar does 2 copies, so now I can take something out of my graveyard and make 2 copies of it. And let's not forget that first ability, okay? That first ability, sacrifice an artifact to give a creature +2/+0 until end of turn. That's not nothing, okay? If you have, I don't know, a Dockside Extortionist and he makes you 12 treasure tokens, you can sack all those treasure tokens to give one of your creatures like +20/+0 or something, right? And just kill someone. So that ability already on itself, that first ability, is pretty decent. The fact that the first ability supplements the second ability, so you can sacrifice something and immediately exile it out of your graveyard to use it. I've done some research for this deck, and I've come across a lot of really interesting cards that work really well in the deck. I gave Oscar a uniqueness score of 8. There's just a lot of different directions you can go with this. Just a really, really great design. And, when I did my Strixhaven list, I had Joffrey really, really high, and I thought Joffrey would be the 3rd most popular Boros commander in a few months behind Feather and Winota, and now I'm thinking maybe Oscar is even better. I think we might see Feather, then Winota, then Oscar, then Joffrey. I think that's maybe the order it'll end up going in the long run. Maybe even Oscar overtakes Winota, because it really is sort of like similar to Feather in a very different way, but very similar to Feather in the reusing of things and the really super value-y theme that you can go with it. Again, the things that I think make for a popular commander in the format are, it's got a pretty good power level, and it's also an interesting build around, and I think Oscar is both of those. So I think it makes sense that it is number 1 on this list. And at the end of the day, I was very happy with the Commander 2021 Commanders. Like I said, I wasn't thrilled with the 99 cards, but the Commanders were great. I've already built around a bunch of these Commanders, I think like 9. I'm going to do as many deck decks as I can. Time is always a factor here, of course. I did a quick little bit of math here. The average score for Commander 2021 Commanders was 11.4, as compared to Strixhaven, which was 10.86, right? That was the average score. So even though I thought Strixhaven was a better set overall for Commander, if you're just talking about the legendary creatures, C21, I think, beat them out, even though, again, Strixhaven had more Commanders. They had 22. C21 only had 20 for some reason, but the Commanders are, I think, better, more interesting for building around. So at the end of the day, I think there are going to be some really popular Commanders from this set that are going to be mainstays in the format for a long, long time. So I guess a good job there. But that is it for today. That is my ranking of the C21 Commanders. Thanks for tuning in.